Good morning. It's always a challenge to follow such an excellent and outstanding presentation that we've just heard. But if you'll bear with me, we'll talk a little bit about working memory, human, and the capacity of working memory, mental fatigue, and human performance. The reason we're looking at that is overall my history. I've been chasing down errors, human errors, because human errors, if they're not captured, if we're not controlled, lead to incidents, accidents, and in aviation, oftentimes to death. From looking at it from the outside, looking at crew resource management and threat and error management protocols, there was just always questions left unanswered as to why some of these things happen. And so now looking deeper for causality, taking it into inside the brain and see what's going on in there. When we look at working memory capacity, we're going to talk first about that. Then we're going to look at a little bit at the human performance aspect of it, how that engages in what we do. Then we'll touch a little bit on fluid intelligence, which they're tied very strongly together. And if we're going to evaluate one, we look at the other. We can't understand what's going to happen and how we perform differently unless we look a little bit at physiology and then how that affects mental fatigue and the impacts on work memory capacity. And then we'll complete it. One thing we all would like to think in aviation, I'm an operator. Okay, I'm not a real researcher. I just play one today, but I'm an operator. All my life I've been an operator. And we all would like to think we start with the brain of an F-35 Raptor, that we are at the top of our game when we're ready to go. But what we don't know is what's going to happen at the end of that flight and with all the work and the effort that goes into it. There's going to be degraded performance. We just don't know how much. But this actually is not an accurate representation. What it is more like is this. We all start with varying levels of performance capabilities, skills, knowledge, and abilities. And it's external and internal. So if we don't know where we're starting from, then we really have no idea where we're going to finish up when we're faced high workloads, high task loading, and move on. So looking at working memory capacity, what we discovered, it is measurable. And it's important that we do that through complex span tests, operational span tests, and there's even automated span tests, which are available for anybody to use for research. What these tests do is they define the qualities. So most of the research I looked at in the literature, when looking at working memory capacity, they took the top quartile, the top 25%, and the bottom 25%. And they used those in their work because it created a very clear dichotomy of performance capabilities or decrements. And that's important that we understand that. It created high workload and low working memory capacity individuals. They broke them out that way. We need to assess the individual differences if we're going to understand where we start from. And we heard earlier today a little bit about, and I've seen a lot of the programs coming up, a lot about attention control and working through problems and high task loading. Working memory capacity is significant in all of these. And it contains some things called active manipulation, which is part of executive control. So the main part of the brain is involved in telling you what to look at, when to look at it, and why you should look at it. And that helps you with goal-directed behavior. The other thing that's incorporated that is fixed storage. How much information do you have available to you? Is it available to you, and can you get at it? And that has also to do then using that information in problem solving engages fluid intelligence. And then attentional control is an aspect of executive control. And that involves, number one, active memory maintenance. Active memory is your short-term memory, what's going on around you, what's happening right now. Inactive memory is those things you learn and study your experience. That takes effortful retrieval to bring that forward. And that's part of the active control. The brain, the executive function tells you what to look at and when to find it. When we're looking at attentional control, that's a huge portion. And a lot of the research talks about how significant this is in working memory capacity. It Badley talked about it, and they talk also about goal-directed behavior. So the two of them work together in parts of the brain to keep us focused, keep us moving in the right direction. Read that quote, please, and when you do, in the second sentence down, pay attention to the part of it says about presence of interference. That's a huge part of what we're talking about, is how well can we maintain goal orientation and focus in our tasks that we're doing in the midst of interference and distractions. That's a key component of working memory capacity. And yet we don't really measure that for our pilots in advance going in. We have no idea what their capacity is. Further on in the EEG study, Chen identified that high working memory capacity individuals have a much higher level of ability to bring relevant information forward and maintain it. They're better at blocking irrelevant information during retrieval. In other words, when you have to go back and find that information you need in relation to something that's going on, new stimulus. And they can block distracting stimuli that are not relevant and it's not important. These are characteristics that are essential for minimizing error. Two other parts of proactive of working memory capacity involve proactive control, which is thinking in advance. Those of you in aviation are familiar with situational awareness. That's a term that refers to knowing an accurate representation of what has happened, what is happening, and therefore what might happen looking forward, and being able to prepare effectively for that. That kind of engagement is proactive control. Reactive control is when you face something, waiting till you face something, and then trying to retrieve the information you need to respond appropriately and accurately in order to come up with a solution. What was discovered is that high working memory capacity individuals are more likely to use proactive control in their engagement and in their tasks. Similarly, the low WMC individuals are more reactive in the way they respond. We're going to find out some of that why in a minute here. So let's look at some of the characteristics of a low working memory capacity individual based on the testing that was done. Number one, they use broad-based brain engagement. In this case, it sounds good, but what it really means is that they need more of their brain engaged to solve a simple basic task that they're doing than someone with high working memory capacity. So they're actually working harder at basic level task work, using more of it. And where that comes into play later, we'll see, is during high task loading when they're challenged even more. They're more stress sensitive. So as stress levels go up, their performance degrades much more rapidly than a high WMC individual. They have reduced attentional flexibility. In aviation, this is not a good thing. If a crew makes a decision and then perseveres with that decision in spite of new information, new stimulus, new things occurring, errors occur. So we need that flexibility in how we operate and our ability to filter and sort through the relevant information and to block out the irrelevant information. They've been determined to be more reactive. And that we saw that earlier, so that makes sense. We know in aviation that reactive behavior, in the most part, in decision-making is probably not a good thing. We need to process all the information and be proactive. So conversely, high working memory individuals have improved executive function. That's, again, the ability of the prefrontal cortex, the main part of the brain, to influence the information that you're drawing forward, that you're bringing into the mix and keeping it active and available in the midst of problem solving. Goal-oriented perseverance is staying focused on that task, and again, not allowing distractions and interruptions to interfere with your ability to maintain that. The relevance of the information that comes forward is critical, because if you allow irrelevant information, whether it be from long-term memory that it really isn't appropriate, or a current new stimuli that is engaged in aviation, and you allow that into your processing, it can degrade your ability to react appropriately and in a timely manner to the task at hand. They have strong attentional control, and that's just what we were talking about. The ability to block distractions and irrelevant information. So we've seen again, they looked at the top 25%, the bottom 25%. So this is a very clear division, but it is clear and it's powerful. And high WMC people use proactive behavior. So that means that they're looking ahead. They're trying to plan. They have and holding ideas and concepts in their mind, looking forward to be able to respond more quickly. So working memory capacity and fluid intelligence in the literature, you'll see a lot of comparisons. The testing for one is very similar to the other. So any future research should include the level of fluid intelligence. And fluid intelligence is more the idea of taking disparate information and bringing it together in a problem-solving manner. And as opposed to crystallized intelligence, which is more knowledge-based at the extreme. It's just what you know and what you studied and bringing that forward. So fluid intelligence seems to be related very directly to those with high working memory capacity, and that they compare very closely together. So there's some relationship there, and it may have to do with the parts of the brain that they are active in that they're using. Another thing that in the testing that was done is to look at, well, were strategies used that would potentially alter or skew the data to define, is this person high work memory capacity or low, or do they have a good fluid intelligence? And they've been pretty much isolated as independent of that. So the testing strategy really didn't influence the determination. A key component in switching attentional focus is that when new and distracting information comes, you need to be able to decide, do I need to look at that or I don't need to look at that? If you're out in the veldt and you're looking at a zebra and suddenly you see a lion over there, your mind is has to determine very quickly which one is more relevant at the moment, and then take that into the processing. And so that ability to have that switching focus and the flexibility is important. Looking at some of the physiology, we have to pay attention to the ACC is very highly involved. That's in the yellow. And you notice it's buried in between, and it's been known to be very strongly involved in attentional focus and decision-making. That becomes important as we look at it in terms of where it lives. One of the things that the ACC does, the anterior cingulate cortex, it's involved in cognitive processing, reward-based decision-making. That all comes from the top of the brain, okay? The prefrontal cortex, the neocortex, it's involved in that, and that's associated with the ACC. It's also involved in processing emotions and regulating responses. Well, that all comes from the limbic area, which is down here in the middle of the brain, the amygdala and the limbic responses. So you can see it's a mediator that operates in between both sides, and it's involved in the filtering and sorting of all that information as it comes and goes. One of the problems that we have right now with the current testing is with the EEGs and some of those, they don't really reach deep enough into the brain to really assess what's going on at this level. All right, so much of this is chemically evaluated. So there's high working memory capacity individuals have a much higher increased activity in the ACC compared to low and during all the testing that they do. And it also involves some of the dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, which is beyond the purview of this talk, but they're connected. The ACC is involved in effortful processing. And what happens over time is the brain is working, adenosine builds up. That's a chemical we need to talk about very quickly if we're going to understand mental fatigue. It increases perceived exertion when you have high levels of adenosine buildup in the brain. It impairs motivation to expend effort. It inhibits dopamine release, right? Dopamine release is tied to goal motivation and moving forward and moving in a positive manner. Elevated levels may directly affect effort-based decision-making. So these are things that we have to understand is going on biochemically in the brain as we're looking at it. So very quickly, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is really, it's a currency. It's an energy currency that's available in the brain. And then it breaks down when there's a demand and releases adenosine. Adenosine then resynthesizes under normal use during the day into ATP again, and the process starts over with a lot of other chemical things going on with it. Why is this important? Because during the long term of the day, eventually the level of adenosine builds up in your brain and you want to sleep. Okay, it's a sleep regulatory substance. It drives the brain towards sleep. In high task loading, there's not enough time to resynthesize ATP at that level. So adenosine builds up rapidly and in short periods of time, maybe 30, 40 minutes of high intense workload. The brain senses this chemically, and the pressure, the sleep pressure on that part of the brain that's working that hard increases, and the brain begins to shut down. It can't work anymore. So let's see what that does in the mental fatigue aspect. We talked about how important it is to be able to block out stimuli. Well, mentally fatigued individuals can't do that so well. So that ties into an enhancement of the negative side of working memory capacity limits. Shown to increase resistance to effort during task accomplishment. So there seems to be a very strong tie into high adenosine buildup through mental fatigue in the high task loading over time and reduced performance. Executive control is reduced. The activity of the prefrontal cortex involved in the ACC is reduced, and we have less engagement in decision-making and managing external stimuli. Go ahead, 5 minutes? Okay, thank you. The reduced motivation and effort in task completion may in fact be tied to the increased adenosine. Why? Because adenosine is a dopamine inhibitor. So high levels of adenosine in the brain due to work high task loading can actually inhibit the release of dopamine, which is the chemical that helps us with goal-oriented motivation. So we see there's a direct tie-in potentially between the biochemistry and what we see in testing. The other thing we see is mental fatigue. The subjects move towards stimulus-based reactions and away from responses. We saw that low working memory capacity individuals exhibit a lot of these same tendencies that we just saw with mental fatigue, didn't we? They're very similar. Well, studies show that those who have working low levels of WMC are exponentially impacted by mental fatigue. Their performance degrades much higher level than those who have a higher working memory capacity, likely due to the increased activity in the ACC and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. That focus, that ability to maintain a higher level insulates them somewhat from some of this. There's a great potential there. So in conclusion, understanding working memory capacity and its levels and performance, it's a key component to human performance. We need to understand it, but we don't really measure it. If somebody knows of an airline that actually measures their crews to see where they're starting at, what type of a performance capability this person has, Please help me, connect me, because I don't think there is one. And yet, if you put two people together who have low capacity and they're put into a high intensity environment with high stress and high task loading and mental fatigue, it seems that the potential is far greater for error and disaster, because we know those individuals are already prone to error compared to high work memory capacity. So if we did testing, we could provide a performance baseline. There is potential, as we heard earlier, for training. So those with low work memory capacity, you could design a training program for them to help them prevent reactive behavior, come up with strategies to improve proactive behavior. They may need more time. It may require cognitive training, but there's a possibility, but we don't even know we need to do it right now. It's an identifiable latent threat to safety, because we know that these people are more prone to error and more subject to mental fatigue. If we can limit this, perhaps through testing and training, we should be able to have an impact on incident accidents and save lives. Thank you for listening. Any questions?